is generative AI as a social collaboration tool and investigation through interface theory. Professor Joubin is a public interest technology scholar program fellow and an affiliate at the National Science Foundation Institute for Trustworthy AI in Law and Society, TRAILS. And she's a leading voice in generative AI, humanities and social justice issues. She's the inaugural recipient of the Bell Hooks Legacy Award and holder of the Martin Luther King Jr. Award, and is Professor of English, Women's, Gender and Sexuality Studies, Theatre, International Affairs and East Asian Languages and Literatures at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where she serves as founding co-director of the Digital Humanities Institute and the co-director of the Taiwan Education Research Program. So we're very honoured to have her here. And without further ado, I'm going to sit down and wait for you to start.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see you. It's a privilege to address a room full of mostly historians, I understand. My home department is English, and today I'm going to speak to you about my own critical theory of artificial intelligence, and there will be a bit of case study as well as a quick demo of a proprietary AI that I built with my students this summer. I just landed this morning in Belfast from Washington, D.C. So definitely trying to stay awake today. We're going to start with some of the key questions, of course. What exactly is an interface? So at the core of my research is kind of this interface theory, which comes out of new media studies. And whom does the screen interface serve? Because AI currently is mediated primarily through the screen. There's the voice AI, of course, the virtual assistant, but primarily the screen. So we're going to investigate what makes screens so special in our life, in our research, and how does AI affect the publics? We'll have a bit of definition of the publics, how they're formed, and eventually consequences of metaphor as we anthropomorphize technologies of representation, or perhaps use anthropocentric metaphors to talk about technologies. All of these are technologies of representation, and that's why I believe I have a place at the table discussing artificial intelligence, no different from books, from theater. These are all technologies of representation. They have presentational aspect of your ideas, your artistic vision. They have representational aspect, right? Any media would have these properties, and oftentimes in discussions, conversations dominated by tech bros and by technologists, that they completely overlook or misunderstand the nature of technologies' representations, how they affect our world and our worldview. So I have some keywords: performance, obviously, interface, and the publics. So as I mentioned, performance relies on technology representation, which govern both stagecraft and the output of generative AI. So it is like a performing agent, like an actor. If that's not obvious, think about the word that's most associated with AI: prompt. Who uses prompts? Theater actors, right? With a prompt, they have prompt book. They put on a performance, and so basically intention enactments within specific parameters. That's what performance is. And AI outputs, like theater, they are also framed by interfaces of representation. So it is actually theatrical, and that's my key theory here. If you look at AI's outputs, it is theatrical in nature. It's responding to you. It is in a tug of war's relationship with you. It's an expansion of what you just said. It doesn't understand what you said, but based on those cues, you will do all these things. Interface essentially it refers to some kind of contact points, right? In 1962, we had Marshall McLuhan's famous theory, who gave us the phrase the medium is the message. So this media studies scholars talks about interfaciality between two structures. That is what an interface is. Over the decades, definitions, understanding evolved. So we had, for example, Alexander Galloway, who talks about interface as points of transition between different mediatic layers within nested systems. So nested systems refers to the idea that you have a system that contains a system. You have kind of a tool of representation that contains like other stuff. So AI, most obviously, what does it contain? Well, data sets. Data sets are too large for humans to process meaningfully, and it represents that typically in a succinct manner, discursively. So that's a type of nested system. You might talk of the painting frame or the window as a nested system as well, because it is there to contain and frame something else, or the theatrical stage. So my own definition, based on all these theories, is that when we talk about interface, it's actually a set of relations enabled by a framing medium. I see there's an F missing here. Meaning generating mediums. So we need to think of interface not as machines, but rather as relationships, like our relations to other humans, to the environment, to other species. So it's kind of an ecology. Last but not least, I define publics as, again, interrelations between human and data, interrelations between human and environment. Up here are some of the previous definitions of the publics. John Dewey, probably the best known, who talk about not just a group of people, but a group of people who are collectively affected by something, by social transactions, by a particular kind of law. Michael Warner talks about, defines the public as a crowd witnessing itself in social spaces shaped by discursive relations that address them. So in theater, you have discourses that specifically address this group of people who bought ticket tonight, and they are a theatrical public, for instance. So based on all this, I think we're ready to then look at the properties of the screen. Essentially, I believe in our era of information abundance, the screen is conditioning and controlling our access to information, our access to narratives, essentially. They activate mediated messages, and if you think of the difference, what is so unique about a screen? If you think of the stage, typically people associate kind of contingency with it, the stage, because there's so-called liveness, performances each night are supposed to be different based on the dynamics. Screen is fixed, remember. In my view, screen is highly editorialized. It's like a book, right? This post-production, whatever finally reaches your screen, even if it is not quite, but people tend to associate with the screen a sense of fixedness. That's largely because of film culture and screen culture. So it's a bit of illusion of fixity. And now AI causes people to anthropomorphize the screen first. So I mentioned the problem with metaphor in the beginning, right? I think when ChatGPT burst onto the scene as the first open access large language model has been in the work for a long time, just they're not as accessible. When it burst onto the scene in late 2022, a lot of people are talking about humans and machines, even would the machine have consciousness? Is it our new God? All of these kind of thinking, it's highly problematic because they use the wrong metaphor and emphasize the wrong thing. Instead of humans versus the machines, which conceals social justice issues, labor issues. Like who's producing this? As if it's there by itself, right? The designer, and who performs the labor-intensive work to train the LLM. Instead of thinking of humans and machines, I emphasize actually it's humans and humans. So even if it's AI, you should think deeply about not AI as a human agent, but how it comes to be. And I think that would completely change our view and emphasis so there are two things, both to get away from anthropocentric metaphors, kind of the AI hallucinates, it thinks, it dreams, it's quote-unquote learning, to get away from that, but also to get away from the binarism, humans versus machine or human and machine. Instead to kind of refocus the attention on social justice issues, right? As we might recall, linguists George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, they have reminded us in the book Metaphors We Live By. Metaphors do matter because metaphors already predetermine how we can think about the world. It channels thoughts in a specific direction. And so wrong metaphors is kind of a big deal. It's not just oh, you're anthropomorphizing a machine. In fact, they'll end up mythologizing AI, redirecting the responsibilities. And so that we don't think about, for instance, currently the operable large language models, they are all owned by just a few large corporations. For example, I want one, but I cannot afford it. It's so resource intensive. You need financial resources. You need servers the size of several buildings, for instance, and need coolers. And who are these people? That's Google, OpenAI, Meta, Anthropic. I think we're out about it, probably.
We can still hear you, so we should.
Right. So, and these are all American companies, right? They have open source models, but primarily, if I were to build a custom AI bot like I did this summer, I still have to make calls to one of them and pay the so-called tokens, basically subscription. So instead of mythologizing this, we refocus on the human decisions. I think we'll come back again to the problem. So there's a kind of better metaphor. This is offered by Anne Catherine Hales, who's a pioneer, Hayles, Hales, the pioneer of digital humanities. Started out as a literary studies scholars. So for AI, she says that perhaps techno-symbiosis would be a more useful metaphor. So symbiosis basically refers to the relationship among biological kind of mechanisms, right? Kind of, it's a biological term, but primarily it's a kind of long-term relationship, right, between organisms. Symbiosis would emphasize our relations with all agents, humans, non-humans, computational media, including AI, right? And human beings will be constantly thought of in relation to others, and that's also very important. I would propose, building on that, an even better one, ecology of words. So with AI, we're operating in a new ecology of words. It is very disruptive, but at the same time, what it produces, it's not actually mechanical. What it produces is simply a synthesis of human outputs, which is very well known by now, right? Large language models doesn't think it, Noam Chomsky has established that it cannot do natural language processing. The grammar is actually statistical, so it's a different kind of grammar. Statistical meaning, all these words are statistically most likely to go together, and so it sounds grammatically correct. But if you think of it as ecology of words, that's like a boomerang, like what humans collectively said, and now here is a powerful synthesizer kind of spit it back at us, or reproduce it, reshape it, representing it in some new form. It may initially look alien, but remember, it's really a mirror held up to us. So I teach Shakespeare, Renaissance history, early modern, and so AI has prompted me to rethink our relationship to history, particularly with my students. And here's an example of kind of early question early on in the semester, where we are studying Shakespeare and theatrical performances of Renaissance London. They started out with more simplistic questions like, why did Shakespeare's contemporary audiences, why did people back then, quote, take boys for girls, referring to the all-male professional theater practices? And of course, that's actually a question that brings contemporary assumptions, binarism, and kind of cisgender sexism to the scene. Wrestling with AI, instead of kind of asking AI to answer your questions, I asked them to go through several iterations to to have AI begin to ask them questions. Why do you ask a question like this? What is the assumption here? What are the contexts? Once they are forced to look deeper into their soul, typically, these are called prompts. Like, write me a college essay. I'm done tomorrow. But here, if you turn it around and have AI ask them, instead of feeding into a question, I'm learning about Shakespeare's time period, and I would like to think of 3 possible questions to ask in class. So kind of turn it around. Toward the end of semester, they begin to have more open-ended questions, such as, how did early modern people practice gender on stage, or perhaps in daily life? How does it resonate with that? Do they use gender accessories, props, or dresses? How was there's, for example, the dress make the man, the clothes make the man, and what does it mean? Things like this. So in a way here, I'm using AI not as an instrument of reason, There's no precision involved. It's brainstorming. It is there to be a bit of a buddy. You are playing tennis with this imperfect, flawed tutor, but it's kind of free and it's available 24 hours. It's non-judgmental. Nobody would know what kind of processes you went through. As opposed to practicing tennis against a wall, which is good, but you may not improve as much. So it's in this sense, it's really a kind of a symbiotic process of thought development. It's not, so I of course, a lot of warning, AI wouldn't know anything organically, it doesn't have domain knowledge, so please do not rely on it to say, retrieve historical knowledge. It's actually not an effective way to use it, but if you use it artistically, artistic meaning that, rehearsal or kind of to create fiction, it could be of some use. And here is to train your mind rather than, AI knows the early modern period far better than you, and so it can be your teacher. It's here to teach. Not at all. It's actually a tutor in a different sense, as we'll see later. So speaking of that, I'm going to now head into a section about kind of definitions of AI. Like, there are different kinds of AI actually, right? Before ChatGPT, AI has been with us a long time. Nobody actually does enough critical thinking about it as we use, say, Google Map. So we have actually technologies with self-governing protocols. Any type of these technologies are artificial intelligence because it's algorithmic based. For example, you do any kind of search that's ranking algorithms. And we should perhaps question that a little bit more. People would question Google, for example, because some results, they float higher, we know it's paid result. But even if you do a search which is quite innocent, and you think about Project Muse, JSTOR, library catalogs, they're less commercial interest in there, but how is the result ranked? There's popularity there. So the work that's been cited more would be cited even more, right? Because it's based on keywords and frequency. Frequency is, mentioning, and so that's the current mechanism is extremely flawed, and it's difficult to discover. So-called marginalized research or kind of less cited. Generative AI is a large language machine learning model programmed to generate text or images that resemble the patterns in the data sets. So it's actually 2 different kinds we're talking about here. So the first example I gave was deterministic AI, rule-based systems, ranking, right? You plot a course on Google Map, tend to be predetermined, tend to be similar each time, between QUB campus and my hotel, for instance, how many possible routes would there be? So the output is based on a set of pre-established rules and pretty clear. If you ever had spam filters, it's this type. The interesting thing about generative AI is it's not always predictable, right? It's black box tech, meaning that the designers cannot explain exactly like how and why it reaches this output this time. There's a bit of randomness to it. But I see that randomness useful, like a jazz musician who would miss a note, right? But each time is different. And so if you use it artistically and not use it for any reasoning task, it could become useful in some context. So the crucial bit is point number 3, right? It yields slightly different results. They are cognate, but slightly different results, even if the questions seem similar. So the social media recommendation system is a type of ranking system, right? It's also probabilistic. It's also a kind of probabilistic AI based on your browsing history, users' prior actions. The system is guessing that so the content-serving algorithm will calculate the probability that you would engage with certain type of content. You would like this content. So as simple as you might also like is actually a type of probabilistic AI algorithm behind it. And all this is to say that we are interacting with a retrospective tool, because it's a machine that looks backward. It's a bit of time machine, right? It is not predictive. It's not a predictive tool. It's a retrospective, descriptive tool at best. If it can describe accurately, right? It's data set. This kind of randomness, some said, is useful for certain kind of task that tolerates or demands fuzziness, as opposed to, say, calculation. If I have a calculator, you punch in the correct formula. Every time the answer is the same. Here you punch it in, it's by design. It wouldn't give you the same thing. And that makes it useful for social training, for rehearsals of social situations. I teach fiction. So one example, say, let's rehearse Romeo and Juliet. Now, how would you do that? First of all, this is a great training ground for students to understand. If they were to play Juliet, need to explain Romeo to the partner, to this machine partner, really well. And that's already an excellent learning goal. And after that, you can then rehearse. If it gets it, quote unquote, wrong, it's no big deal, because what we're doing here is simulation, understanding social dynamics and scenarios, rather than retrieving historical facts or kind of using it as a study tool to understand particular historical events. So there's actually already a term for that. It's called social robotics. Not necessarily robot, but basically any kind of mechanism or tools that interacts with humans for social outcomes, such as interviews, for example. Actually, the social robotics we all hate a lot. It's when you call a company, your call is really important to us. Please sell until it's no longer important to you. And you will have to pierce through the bot, right? Please state what you need, but you only understand limited things. And we have to say it in a particular way. That's actually a type of social robotics, probably not for the better. Even online chatbots interact with companies, they frequently have that. I find myself trying to discern, is that human or not? And if it's human, perhaps would understand my request better. In chat, it's much more difficult, though. If it begins to seem like there are templates and patterns, most likely pre-programmed. So that's a type of lower-end social robotics. But generally, AI can be designed to play a role as a more inclusive social robotic technology. Even though we need, of course, we talk a lot about human in the loop, but I think we need to talk about trained humans in the loop. The assumption is humans are just better, which is ridiculous, of course, given the diversity and the different experiences and backgrounds. To say that it's akin to racist statements, as in teaching of modern languages. Get someone from India, get someone from China, they will be great, which is ridiculous. We understand language pedagogy is a professional field, requires training, right? And the joke is, if you go down that route, you would go to the zoo and hire an animal to teach zoology. So simulation is a key word, and to see it as a social surveillance instrument, to get the average of what the society collectively thinks, of what their thought habits are. And that's where the keyword for my talk, social collaboration, came in, as you can see in the last bullet point here. If you use it in a certain manner, it's kind of a social collaboration tool. It forces you to become more aware of the social aspect of it. Beyond the examples I gave, I've also used AI tools like Complexities.ai to anonymize my student papers, because learner psychology is a huge obstacle. I'm teaching writing. We need to workshop. The writing in class is called peer review. They tend to say nice things. They tend to say things that don't really matter. Even if they can identify, they wouldn't want to embarrass their friends, because they know this piece is written by someone who's actually sitting here, right here. What do? I feed 10 papers into the machine. I treat it like a blender, like a juice blender. Out comes a fictional paper that reflects all the 10 common flaws, the patterns of those papers. So it's a type of anonymization. It's not written by any particular student, but it sounds very much like what they would have written. And that's much more effective. I am transparent. I told them how I produced this to demonstrate the patterns that we want to work on. And there's this openness that I've never seen before in my class. They're able to talk honestly about writing as a craft, instead of there's this kind of barrier of potential embarrassment. No one wanted to be kind of be put on the spot, right, or embarrass any person. But if it's completely machine generated, it's not interesting either. They'll just say, you know, AI is dumb or not as good as human. This kind of binary thinking. But here is actually a process of anonymization that is useful. And finally, I have a scholarly example. This is very, very recent. It just came out. So there's a team of historians. They are using AI in a similar way that I'm using it, but kind of to achieve data justice. They're anonymizing sensitive data. They're studying anti-apartheid solidarity letters. There's more than 700 letters. But this is private communication, right? So as historians, there's this difficulty. You want to write about it, publicize this important period of history, but also respect the privacy. And so that's where AI comes in. It also helps with hand pattern recognition to trace the relationships, the provenance of these letters. And the project is called the Personal Rights, the Political, rendering Black lives legible through the application of machine learning to anti-apartheid solidarity letters. And it's recently been funded by ACLS, American Council for Learned Society. And in an interview, the project leader said that they're proud to come up with an innovative way to open up an archive while ensuring privacy concerns are respected. In the social sciences, this is commonly done manually, of course. You interview subjects and you have to strip the identifying details. You have to come up with pseudonyms. But this is kind of larger scale, and I'm really excited to see that AI can be used in this way in the humanities especially. So I call this a culture of civic science, in the sense that AI is not the realm of the coders, but actually people who deal with words, such as us, really should be at the forefront, because it's about words. So there's two components to it. Civic science, it involves scientists, but they also involve citizens. Technologies have often been developed by able-bodied engineers without community input. If you think about prosthetic technologies, there are technologies to enable people to do certain tasks. Primarily, they don't have any input, and much less scientists who identify as disabled. So here, it's important to have, we're not talking about disability, but talking about, for example, people who deal with words a lot, people who teach writing. I think these people should be very much the core team of anyone who develops any technology that manipulate with words. And so sign language machine translation, if I have time, I would like to go into that because we're in Northern Ireland. My example is actually an innovative group. This is Dublin-based, and they're doing Irish Sign Language performance. Irish Sign Language performance of Shakespeare. And they brought in an AI app. They are beta testing. They make the audiences have the app on their phone and point the phones at the performance during the show. So these are non-sign language using hearing audiences who would otherwise not have access to the meaning. And so to see how machine translation works, it fails miserably, but then the experiment teaches us a lot about human-machine relationships. They call it machine guest. Like you're a caretaker, you're looking after this phone app, which is AI, but recognizes limited information. It can translate for sure the words, but words don't mean anything. In Macbeth, famously, you have the line tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, but each iteration is kind of different, sometimes ironic. But it cannot translate tomorrow question mark, tomorrow exclamation mark, tomorrow ellipsis. It will give you just literally it said tomorrow. We understand sign language has multiple channels. The visual vernacular is one of them, where emotions are expressed. In fact, for AI to listen, speech recognition, it's the same problem because we embed a lot of information, emotional information, semantic information in the way we talk, right? So if you were to transcribe it, it may sound bland or there's no emotion, but if you were to embody it, like act it out, it would mean very different things. And so that's an area where a lot of new research is going into. So fascinating to see that example of kind of artists using and collaborating with AI to enhance access. So we can come back to further detail there. And I'm going to continue with the civic science. I believe if we practice civic science, we can solve the problem of the biases of technological solutionism, namely the idea that the wrong assumption, that philosophical problems are engineering ones. Whatever your problem, there's an app for it. I'll develop an algorithm. But of course, not all social issues can be simplified in this way. The next problem it solves is that conversations about technologies now focus on eternal questions, which is good, like mind and body, consciousness. But unfortunately, at a kind of shallow level, if you ask philosophers, a kind of shallow answers, that if you develop civic science, bring scientists and responsible citizens together who are not coders, we can be better able to solve this problem. So now I would like to invite you to go to my website, which is criticaltheory.info. Just one word, criticaltheory.info. And on the lower right, if you're on your phone, I think you scroll down, there's this little dialogue bubble, and that's my AI that I probably trained. On my site, elsewhere, I won't go into detail. In full transparency, I tell people that I don't store or use the input data to train this model, and I make it clear how this is built, so everything is transparent. There's no mystery to it. And the base LLM, large language model, unfortunately, it is OpenAI at the moment. It's for GPT-4o. That's the base model to enable it to talk. But beyond that, everything is proprietary, meaning that it doesn't draw other than the ability to talk. Also, it's multilingual, by the way. But the training data is completely mine. So it's that open access textbook. And it's able to interact with students and answer students' questions. So if you were to type in a query, it'll, by design, will give you a list of bullet points, kind of answering in a succinct manner, and I've programmed it in the back end to not write essays. And it's good at asking you more questions. So what context? And if the query is too simple, it'll actually come back and poke you instead of giving you a lecture like most AIs would do. You'll notice that as it's starting to answer, a new box would appear. It's called Contact Professor Joubin. And this is my fail-safe mechanism. It's always there, regardless of the quality of the interaction, so that it's a convenient place to click. Students can click and contact me. So that's how I keep the trained human in the loop. And there are some magic words, which is known as boundary setting words in prompt for better results. If you say, according to Michel Foucault, according to Professor Joubin, it'll immediately point to the specific person or the lesson or the part. The website is fairly big. So if you say according to, it's a way to kind of direct you. There are no chapter numbers, but it'll direct the bot to the particular sections of interest to generate more precise results. And we're still beta testing it. I just deployed it this fall semester in my classes at the moment. And I believe this is the first proprietary artificial intelligence teaching assistant in the humanities that follow the trustworthy principles. So at my university, we have a trustworthy AI initiative. I'm a faculty in it. And these are the definitions. I follow the National Institute of Standards and Technologies definitions. There are 4 pillars. You have explainability, meaning that it's not a mystery, right? Currently, because of commercial interest is well protected, like OpenAI, despite a lot of probes, they refused to reveal the provenance and the exact detail of the data sets on which they trained their bot, which is a huge problem. And they cited as, oh well, this is trade secret, we cannot reveal this part. The suit continues. The suit continues. We'll see eventually which side wins. EU is far more powerful in regulation than North America in general. North America has less protection for consumer interest. So I practice explainability because a part of my site, the about part, it explains fully exactly what goes in. At this moment, those are all my words. So it's completely proprietary. I load all my writings. It's possible for a scholar who happens to write. And transcripts of my lectures. So it's a bit of a parrot of me, and a copy of me with boundaries set. It's supposed to regurgitate. It's very boring. It's regurgitate what I said, but in an accessible manner though. So it's important that it takes cues from the users. Depending on how you frame the question, it'll realize the level the student is at, and it'll try to present that information to match that level, which is a huge feature for accessibility. It's also multilingual, so you can my international students can actually interact with it in their native language. About 70 languages are covered. Interpretability is another key feature. Is the model interpretable? Yes, it is, because here are the, all the training. You actually can see the training data, which is the open access book. As for my transcripts of my lectures, some videos are embedded on the site, so yes, you can listen to our lectures. And it is accountable because I made clear that I fully protect the privacy. Each interaction, once you close that window, it's erased. So it doesn't save. It doesn't save it. The downside, of course, it cannot, unlike if you have an account with OpenAI, with using the GPT, it remembers your previous conversation, so you can. It's less effort to reintroduce yourself. So we won't have that. Now, I actually make it very transparent. The last principle. I do that out of ethical principle, but also out of necessity. I simply cannot afford to run it as it is. It's already very expensive. Not the part where I make calls to OpenAI, just the server where I have to rent compute instance, which is computing hours. And the hours is not calculated by our chronological hour. If there are 100 people using it, that's 100 hours right now. simultaneously, even if it's 1 hour, if you look at the clock. So to store that kind of data and then to further process it just requires, I already ran out my grant this summer, so there's no ability to do that. But for companies who have vested interest, of course they're putting all the resources on Facebook, if you're on any social media, to store everything, even if anonymized. And we understand if you use commercial models, even open access, they do take your queries and everything and your interaction as further training data. So in using it, you're helping them train it. Here, I can only beta test with specific student assistants, with my classes, tell me if there are red flags, because I would not know your particular interaction with the bot. It's your private matter. So I wanted to quote Jaron Lanier has this to say, which I find really powerful in terms of social collaboration. If we see AI as a form of social collaboration, it actually makes everything actionable, right? It gives access to the engine room, which is made of people rather than engines. So that's something to bear in mind. And I believe my project is an example of civic science. I'm not a coder, but my student taught me enough of it in order to maintain and develop and continue training without me having to always rely on him. I cannot do it from scratch, but I'm learning. At the same time, my computer scientist student is a master's student. He also learned a great deal about everything I said here before. For him, coding is just writing some codes. There's a problem, professor said, that needs to be solved. But here we explore, first of all, what is the problem? Let's identify the problem. Is it worth solving? Perhaps it's actually a different kind of problem. And so it's a highly it's a two-way street, mutually beneficial. We both learn, and we both have to learn. So I have to learn enough code in order to continue and do this, and to understand how coders typically think. I think that's very eye-opening. And on the other hand, to collaborate, to bring in your interdisciplinary expertise rather than kind of sitting there and waiting for, say, I think this is in the field of edutech, educational technologies, which is a big field in the US at least. A lot of for-profit companies are at play here. But I think we can renovate educational technologies. If we had resources, we'll be able to open this up, and anyone without coding knowledge can come in and just say, upload your transcripts, upload works you published, and you would begin to build your own AI assistant, like how I did it. And in fact, my rather genius student already prepared, already coded from scratch such an easy-to-use website. Currently, it's for one person, and that's just me. But if we have resources, can completely open up to the world, and you can do this. Anyone who would have subscription to one of the language models, be able to make calls, can then have your own. So it's kind of a powerful grassroots movement to shift the terrain a little bit, so that the means of production would not be controlled only by the limited number of tech pros. So, to sum up, AI as a social collaboration tool can promote intentional interactions with AI and to create more explicit rules of the game. The rules of the game right now, unfortunately, are not transparent. And so I would not say GPT-4o is trustworthy because of the 4 principles I named. They actually don't meet any of the criteria. And when I teach with AI, I promote the understanding that AI is a socially bounded technology. Socially bounded, it's within the context of its use. It's no longer whether you can use AI, don't cheat. I think that's a lower level question. It is important to focus on provenance, but I try to move away from that, and I focus on quality of writing. Sure, you can use dictionary, you can use Google, for example, and of course AI. But if the end result doesn't meet the requirement, you would not earn credit. And my students understand that really well and begin, since I talk very openly about this, there's no banning per se, but rather we focus on the outcome and the quality, the processes. So that's the gist of it. I wanted to kind of pause here and let's have a discussion, and I'm happy to take questions. There are many other examples to go through. So happy to answer any of your questions.